I was uninvited from my mom's birthday for not looking good beside my sister. My own father looked me straight in the eye and told me, "Don't call me your father," if I dared show up to my mother's birthday party. The reason? Because I simply wasn't good enough to stand beside my sister's fancy new boyfriend. But what they didn't know was that their carefully planned celebration was about to plunge into darkness, literally, exactly 3 weeks later. Follow me for a moment. You might just recognize something of your own story in mine. I'm Ryan. I'm 30 years old, living in a quiet town about 40 minutes from Seattle. My mornings are a simple ritual: fresh coffee, a quick check of the weather, then a short drive to work. I'm a co-founder of a small technology company focused on sustainable energy. Most people, including my own family, don't quite grasp what I do. They still picture me tightening screws and fixing machines, which honestly, I've never minded. I've never felt the need to explain myself. When someone asks about my family, my parents, my sister Jessica, I usually just offer a faint smile and say, "It's been a while since we talked." And that's it. I'm not trying to hide anything, but I simply don't see the point in rehashing it all anymore. For over 2 years now, there's been nothing. No calls, no texts, no holidays, no birthdays. Just a long, unbroken stretch of calm, as if the connection between us had been silently severed, and no one, not even me, made a move to repair it. I used to believe that family was everything. It was a truth woven into the fabric of my life. But 2 years ago, on my mother's birthday, everything I thought I knew about that bond shattered. It started 3 weeks before her birthday. I'd just booked my flight and taken time off work. The plan was simple, just like every other year. Go home a couple of days early, help with the preparations, the cooking, the decorations. Nothing extraordinary. I just wanted to let them know I was coming. I called my mom, but after only 2 rings, my father answered. "I'll be home 2 days early," I announced, trying to sound casual. "If there's anything you need me to pick up or help with, just let me know." His response was vague at first, then a hesitant silence stretched. When he finally spoke, his voice was strange, heavy, like he was trying to avoid something difficult. "Ryan," he started, "if possible, maybe don't come home this year." I assumed he was just worried about my busy schedule. "It's fine, Dad," I reassured him, still clutching my steaming coffee mug. "I've got everything sorted. It's no trouble at all." The pause this time was even longer, deeper. Then his voice came back, firmer, colder. "Jessica's bringing her boyfriend home this year. He's a manager, someone important. Speaks well, carries himself properly. And your job? Well, it isn't very comfortable to talk about, so it's best if you don't come." The words hit me like a physical blow. A sudden, burning heat surged from the back of my neck to my face. My heart hammered in my chest, and I gripped my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles went white. "What the hell did you just say?" I demanded, my voice raw and uneven. "Are you seriously saying that to me right now?" He didn't back down. He didn't soften his tone. He didn't take it back. Instead, he simply, sharply repeated, "Your coming home would just embarrass the whole family. If you insist on coming, don't call me your father." Then, without another word, he disconnected. I slowly lowered the phone. My palm was still shaking, clammy with sweat. The apartment was eerily silent. No TV, no footsteps, just me standing there, staring blankly ahead, feeling like I'd been ripped out of my own life. His words echoed in my head, slow and chilling, like a broken record. "You coming home would just embarrass the whole family. If you still insist on coming back, don't call me your father." For a brief, desperate moment, I wondered if I'd misheard him, if it was some terrible misunderstanding. But no, every word, every icy tone, was as clear and solid as stone. There was no slip of the tongue, no room for a glimmer of hope. I clenched my jaw, my throat tightening as if something large and unyielding had lodged itself there. Immediately, a torrent of memories flooded my mind. For over 2 years, I had been silently paying all their bills: electricity, water, internet. Nobody ever mentioned it. Nobody ever thanked me. And now, they were calling me the family's shame. My hand still trembled slightly as I picked up my phone again, though my mind had begun to cool, to clarify. I opened my banking app. I scrolled down through my transaction history. My sole purpose was to quantify it, to see the exact sum I had spent on my family over the past 2 years. Month after month, without fail, nearly $400 for power, water, and internet automatically deducted from my account. I scrolled gently to the very bottom. Total amount spent, $9,842.17. I stared at that number for a few more seconds, not out of shock, but because something deep inside my chest had finally, brutally settled. It wasn't grief, or even pure fury. It was just an empty space, nearly $10,000, and I was the one they labeled a family shame. As I gazed at the endless list of transactions, a silent question arose, one that no one in my family had ever dared to ask in 30 years. Has Jessica ever done as much for our parents as I have? It wasn't born of jealousy, and I wasn't looking for credit. It was simply that if I was deemed the family shame, against what standard was I being judged? I had covered nearly $10,000 in their living expenses, secretly, without asking for anything in return, without ever even mentioning it. What about her? Had she ever had to make a sacrifice or beg for help? Or did she just arrive, smile pretty, and make an impact in a lovely dress on the arm of a successful boyfriend? I wasn't asking to keep score. I was asking because, for the first time, I clearly saw that fairness was never a factor in this household. I'd grown accustomed to standing on the sidelines since childhood. In family photos, I was often partially hidden or captured at the very edge of the frame, never quite looking at the camera. Nobody ever told me to step aside, but I always did. Jessica was always at the center of every important family event, from birthdays and graduations to her breakups. There was always a reason for everyone to rally around her, to console, to celebrate. I honestly can't recall the last time someone genuinely asked if I was okay. Jessica is 2 years older than me, but the difference between us was never about age. She was the hope, the golden child, the one our parents proudly mentioned when relatives visited. And me. In those same conversations, if I was mentioned at all, it was a brief footnote. Ryan, oh, he's fine. I believe he works in technology. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, stayed out of trouble, and quietly handled everything, they'd eventually see me. They'd finally recognize my worth. But they didn't. It turns out, when you're used to being invisible, nobody notices when you leave. I started covering my parents' utility costs, electricity, water, and internet almost 2 years ago. My mother called first, and that's where it all began. That day, she complained about how the cost of living had skyrocketed, how their bills had unexpectedly increased, and how their retirement income just wasn't enough anymore. Then, gently, hesitantly, she said, "If you could help us even a little, it would mean a lot." I agreed. At the time, I truly believed it would only be for a few months until things settled down. But the months that followed looked exactly like the one before. Nobody ever mentioned ending it, and there was never any backup plan. Every now and then I'd ask, "Is Jessica helping out at all, Mom?" She'd always skillfully evade the topic. Sometimes she'd say, "Just help us this month. Your sister will pitch in next time." Other times, "Your sister's covering Dad's medical stuff." That's not easy either. I heard those lines so many times, I could recite them by heart. And I just smiled, every single time, because I knew none of it was true. So, I kept sending the money, nearly $400 a month, reliably and quietly without complaint. Nobody ever mentioned it. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was simply that I felt it was the right thing to do. I used to think that if I was quiet and responsible enough, they would finally notice me. But today, after everything, they looked at me and said, "I'm the family shame." After a while, the silence in my apartment felt absolute. I just sat there, paralyzed on the couch, my phone still in my hand. I wasn't angry anymore, or heartbroken. There was only one clear emotion settling in my chest. That's enough. Following that thought, I reopened my banking app. I scrolled down to the automatic payment section, where I had set up those monthly transfers for power, water, and internet. One by one, I tapped into each recurring payment and canceled them. Without hesitation. I did it softly, not out of a desire for vengeance, but to preserve the one thing I still had, a semblance of self-esteem, the only thing they hadn't managed to take away from me. About a week later, I received the first message from my mother. It was in the same soothing, gentle tone she always used. There was no mention of our last conversation, no apology. Just a casual notice. The internet bill is due. Can you take care of it? I read the message, stared at the screen for a long moment, then placed my phone down without responding. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because after everything, the very first thing they thought to say was a request for money. There was no "are you okay?" or even a basic "can we talk?" So I remained silent, and that silence, to me, spoke volumes. 2 weeks later, my father called. The phone rang a few times before stopping. I didn't answer. A few minutes later, he left a voicemail. His tone was sharp and impatient, just as it usually had been. The power company called. This month's bill hasn't been paid. What's going on? There was no worry in his voice, no recollection of what he'd said to me the day I called to say I'd be home for Mom's birthday. I listened to the message, then turned off the screen and placed the phone face down on the table. And just like that, I remained silent until my mother's birthday. My mother's birthday arrived 3 weeks after my father told me not to come home. The party went on as normal. Her favorite roasted chicken, cake from her favorite bakery, and a few close relatives gathered around the dinner table. Everything had been meticulously planned and executed, except for one thing: me. That afternoon, precisely at 4 p.m., I was sitting in my living room with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold when my phone chimed. It was my mother calling. I gazed at her name on the screen for a few seconds before setting the phone down. I didn't respond. Didn't even think twice. My dad called a few minutes later, then Jessica. 3 calls in less than 10 minutes. I let them all go. There was no curiosity, no urge to reply. I stayed where I was, leaning lightly against the back of the chair, my gaze fixed on the fogged-up glass. The sky outside was a drab gray. No rain, but cold in that silent, creeping manner that suggests winter has just brushed up against your threshold. The messages began to arrive approximately 10 minutes later. Mom was first. "Ryan, the power has been turned off. The entire house is dark. Please pay the bill." I picked up the phone and read her message in silence. There was no anger or surprise in me, just a calm hollowness creeping through my chest. The type you get when you've spent years caring for a family, and you're the only one left to bear the burden. Then my father's message came. "No water. We can't cook. Handle it now." Following that, Jessica replied, "Internet's down. Guests are arriving. Please fix this urgently." I looked at the clock. 5:12 p.m. I remembered clearly. I had canceled all automatic payments exactly 3 weeks ago, immediately after my father informed me that if I insisted on coming home, I should never call him Dad again. And now, in the midst of the birthday party they had instructed me not to attend, everything began to shut down. Power, water, and the internet. Each one vanished just when they needed it most. I didn't text back or call. I didn't feel the need to explain. I merely sat there, carefully rotating the cold coffee cup in my hands, my eyes still fixed on the window as if seeing past all I could see. And in that moment, I realized they weren't phoning because they missed me. They were calling because there was no one left to shoulder their weight. Around 6 p.m., my phone began buzzing again, this time nonstop. Yet, it wasn't my parents or Jessica anymore. It was the relatives, the kind who only visit on holidays yet feel entitled to pass judgment. The communications arrived in waves. Some people labeled me disrespectful. One remarked openly, "You embarrassed your mother in front of the whole family." Another, more subtle but just as devastating, said, "Your sister was right. People like you shouldn't show up on a happy day." I read through each message without responding. Not because quiet implied agreement, but because I'd grown tired of explaining myself to people who always chose the louder throng above what was right. I was about to put down the phone when the screen lit up again. Aunt Lauren was calling. She was the only family member who still trusted me, who cared enough to look each other in the eyes when it truly counted. She was calling on video via an ancient app that only she and I still used. I paused for a bit before answering on the second ring. The first thing I saw was her face, somewhat obscured by the warm yellow illumination from the kitchen behind her, a location I knew like the back of my hand, every crack in the wall, every noisy cabinet. But tonight, the room felt different. I could hear the clink of silverware, uneasy laughs, and random, strained conversations in the background. She looked at me through the screen, her eyes warm and troubled. "You're not going to pay for it, Ryan." Her tone was light, as if she were trying to gauge what was happening inside my head. I peered into her eyes, and when I finally spoke, my tone was sluggish, as if I was dragging up something I had buried for far too long. "You know, Auntie," I began. "It was Dad who told me not to come." I swallowed hard. He said if I still insisted on showing up, I shouldn't call him my father anymore. She became quiet. Her eyes shifted, as if she was studying the room behind her, piecing together the chaos. Right then, the call devolved into mayhem. I could hear my mother's voice rising above the noise. "Tell him I'm ashamed of him. On this day of all days, how could he do this?" My father's voice, sharp and loud, cut through. "It's not that serious. It's just paying a few bills. What kind of man gets petty over money?" Another voice, I believe it was my uncle, added, "Poor Jessica having to deal with a brother like that." Footsteps approached the camera, and Jessica appeared behind Aunt Lauren, arms folded, lips twisted with annoyance. He even picked up the call. "Mom's been crying all day. Does he even care? Seriously, no shame at all." I didn't say anything. I just observed, remaining silent, as if it were the only way to defend myself. Just as I was ready to end the call, another face came into view on the left side of the screen. A young man with perfectly combed hair and a dark suit. He stared at me with confusion in his eyes, then smiled hesitantly. "Hey, boss," he replied, his voice somewhat scratchy, as if he wasn't sure if the words belonged in this situation. I froze. My gaze remained fixed on the screen, and I unconsciously gripped the phone closer. I had not expected this. Not here. Not on the night when everyone felt I was too much of a shame to be invited. I stared at him for a few seconds longer, and then it all clicked. His expression, the way he spoke. Of course, he was one of the new personnel who had lately transferred from our southern branch. We'd exchanged a few emails, and he'd sent me 2 reports, but I had no idea he was Jessica's boyfriend, the one everyone was trying so desperately to impress. The room behind Aunt Lauren seemed to hold its breath. I noticed her look over her shoulder, and the kitchen erupted in a frantic commotion. Then someone said quietly, "Wait, what did he just call Ryan?" Another voice followed, confused. "Boss. Does that mean Ryan is Jessica's boyfriend's boss?" The whispers grew like a rising wave, overlapping and uneasy. And me? I just kept looking at the screen. No nod, no denial. Simply waiting to see where it would go. Right then, the young man stood up straighter, looked past the camera to the others in the room, and spoke plainly. "In case you didn't know, I work at Pacific Tech. Mr. Ryan is one of the company's co-founders." His remarks were crisp and obvious, loud enough to cut through the clatter of dishes and murmuring, and the room fell into an unusual quiet. It wasn't awkward, it was simply stunned. I still did not say anything. I pushed my lips together and gave a soft nod of confirmation. He returned his gaze to the computer, eyes wide, and I said calmly, evenly, as if the words had been waiting for him, "Hope your big introduction goes perfectly." Then I disconnected. That night I slept soundly. No tossing and turning, no jolting up in the dark with old questions replaying through my mind. For the first time in years, I felt light, not from satisfaction, but because they finally recognized who I was. The next day, before the sunlight had fully filtered through the thin curtains, I reached for my phone and checked my emails as usual. A few meeting reminders, a couple of accounting comments, and then I noticed a name I didn't recognize in the from field. Hudson Kane. I opened the email. The first line struck me immediately. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were Jessica's brother. I've always respected you at the company." I arched an eyebrow, leaned into the pillow, and continued reading. Hudson wrote that he had been truly astonished to discover the family link between me and Jessica. And then, without sidestepping or softening it, he stated, "I didn't expect her to be like that. I'll be ending this relationship. Thank you for not putting me on the spot before everyone." I laid the phone on my chest and closed my eyes briefly. It took me a few minutes to reopen the inbox and begin typing my response, slowly, clearly, and without embellishment. "Hudson, that's your matter. I don't expect anyone to make decisions to stay in my good graces. Think carefully before you do anything. And for the record, I don't bring family into the workplace." I pressed send. No more thought, no lingering emotion. For me, that was sufficient. Some things, once clarified, I don't require anything else. Around 10 a.m., while I was winding up a meeting with the department heads and taking notes, my phone rang in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw the name, Jessica, my sister. I stared at it for a few seconds before hitting decline. Not out of rage, not to make a point, but simply because I'd had enough of apologies that only appeared after everything had already come apart. Within 5 minutes, a message arrived. I'm sorry. I didn't think Hudson would change like that. You're his boss. If you said something, I'm sure he'd listen. Please talk to him. Ask him to come back to me. After reading it, I approached the hallway window and leaned against it. I reviewed the message several times before typing my response, which was neither too long nor too short for her to understand. Hudson didn't leave because I told him to. He left because of how you live, how you treat people, how you look down on what you don't understand, and how you always assume that with a soft enough voice you can steer anyone. I pressed send, put the phone back in my pocket, and returned to my desk. However, less than a minute later, another message arrived. I know I messed up. This time I mean it. I'll change. Please believe me. Just this once. I did not respond. I read it, sat with it for a bit, and nothing moved inside me. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. Sometimes the distance between two people isn't in the apology itself. It's in when the apology arrives. I gently deleted the message, leaving nothing behind, and returned to my current life. By the way, if you're still with me, make sure to hit subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming. A week later, on a Friday afternoon, as I walked back into my home from the garage, I froze on the porch. My parents stood at the front door, each holding a small suitcase, their faces drawn with exhaustion from the long travel. I didn't ask why they were here, or if they traveled all this way just to see me. This wasn't a casual visit. I opened the door and welcomed them in. No tension, no forced politeness, just a simple choice. I didn't want to have that conversation outside, where the wind was picking up on the porch. We sat in the living room, and the tea on the table was still steaming. My father spoke first. He apologized, his tone quieter than normal. My mother added to it, saying they'd thought things through, that perhaps they'd gone too far and things should never have come to this point. I remained silent and did not interfere, just listening to see if this apology marked the end of something or the beginning of something else. And as I expected, my father's tone changed. We're family, Ryan, and family helps each other. We raised you, sent you to school. Everything you have now, a part of it comes from us, right? I looked at him. My countenance remained unchanged, but my stance straightened slightly. Then my mother spoke, her voice quiet, as if she were saying something perfectly sensible. If you could maybe send us about $2,000 a month, just a little support. It's not much for someone like you. I stared at the two people sitting in my living room. The same people who had once kicked me out of a family event because they thought I was an embarrassment. And now they were sitting in my house, placing a monetary value on their apology. $2,000 each month because I was their son. And to them, my success was a debt that I owed them. Following their request, I let out a quiet chuckle. Not loud or snarky, but the type you get when someone tells you a story that simply doesn't make sense. I looked at my parents. Their eyes were fixated on mine, as if they expected me to nod in agreement. But I wasn't angry. I'd come too far to be bothered by stuff like this. I leaned back in the chair, my voice calm and clear. What about Jessica? How much will she be contributing each month? The room appeared to pause at that point. The air tightened. My father cast a quick glance at my mother. She responded slowly, her voice falling slightly. Your sister's job, it's still unstable. And the breakup with Hudson has taken a toll on her. I nodded softly, not surprised. The same old excuses, dressed in empathetic language, but they were merely deflections. I raised my gaze, looked squarely at them, and said, if she agrees to support you with $2,000 per month, I'll do the same. No more, no less. They didn't say anything, just gazed at me, trying to figure out if I was serious. I went on quietly, or if you want me to carry the full amount, I'll need something in writing, a legal agreement confirming that after you both pass, the house will belong to me in full. I sat still after that. No pressure, no further explanation. I just waited to see how they'd react now that, for the first time, I was establishing the terms for something they'd always felt was purely my responsibility. As soon as I finished speaking, the room fell into a deep, dense quiet. My father suddenly rose to his feet. He smashed his palm down on the hardwood table, tipping the teacup over and pouring its contents down the side. His shout echoed around the room, his chest rising and falling in fury. "You're setting conditions for your parents. We raised you for over 20 years, and now you want to nickel and dime us like this. What kind of life are you living, huh?" He was shouting so loudly that I wouldn't have been surprised if the folks next door heard everything. I didn't move or flinch. I just sat there, hands resting on the chair's armrests, my gaze fixed on him, not cold, but no longer gentle. I waited for him to finish before standing up carefully. My voice came out low and calm, yet clear enough to pierce through the chaos he had just created. "I think you both should leave my house." It was not a threat. It was not spoken in anger. It was merely a plea from someone who had reached the absolute limits of what respect could provide. No one said anything else. Only the sound of baggage dragging across the hardwood floor and the door clicking shut behind them, quieter than all the noise they had just left inside me. It's been 2 years since I last saw them, right here in my own home. I didn't ban their phone numbers, change my email address, or cut them off totally. I simply stopped reaching out and waited. I waited to see if they would still consider me a member of the family after I was no longer under the shadow of duty and obligation. In the past 2 years, there has been no call or message inquiring how I've been, no mention of birthdays, health, or even a basic "how are you doing?" I used to believe that one day they would change. However, I've realized that not everyone changes, especially those who have never recognized they were wrong in the first place. I still live here, work, and go about my daily existence. The only difference is that I no longer allow myself to be an emotional ATM, eager to give and be damaged in the name of obligation. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that family is not a place where people can demand kindness and call it love. A real family is one in which you are valued as a person, regardless of what you have to offer. Not as a wallet, not as a backup plan, not as a last resort when everything else fails. And before I end this chapter, I'd like to ask you a question. Was I wrong to decide not to return for refusing to assist my parents with $2,000 per month, despite the fact that they are now elderly and raised me? I used to believe that my family could fix anything. But after being treated like a stranger in my own home more times than I can count, I chose to stand up and break the cycle. Was I overly cold? Or perhaps I was finally learning to appreciate myself at the perfect time? Please leave your opinions below. I sincerely want to hear from you, whether you agree or disagree. If the tale resonated with you, please subscribe to help support the channel. There are still many stories waiting to be told and heard. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.